So, how many of you have studied or tried to learn a language? Nice, nice. And when you look back to that experience, what are some things that come to mind? Is it like endless vocab flashcards to memorize, indecipherable grammar rules, some flubs with pronunciation? I had all those experiences. But now for me, after having spent more than 8 years learning Spanish, when I think of Spanish, one word comes to mind: jengibre, which means ginger. Chunks of it mixed in with the honey in the tea that was brewed by my elderly host mom in Argentina when I was sick. Jengibre. It was the word that I'd forgotten when I was going down the stairs to the kitchen that day to ask her for some. And so I clumsily tried to explain what I wanted without knowing the correct word, ignoring the temptation to whip out Google Translate or some other tool to save myself the embarrassment. But then Julia, with her warm smile, gently reminded me of what the word was. And from then on, I never forgot jengibre. It's comforting, bright yellow tang, an assurance that thousands of miles away from home, someone could care about me. And in that moment, even though it was an objectively embarrassing thing for me to go through, having forgotten this word, this moment of vulnerability and reaching out to Julia also gave her the opportunity to show me kindness and patience and generosity in that moment, which wouldn't have been possible if I had backed out and used a language learning tool. And that's why I'm getting worried about the growing availability of ever more sophisticated AI translation tools, because I think they're going to lead to an increased temptation for us to outsource this kind of vulnerability. I mean, look at this. We now have AirPods that can directly translate a language straight into your ears without you having to learn it to begin with. We're in this process of automating something that is so human. And what scares me also about the rise of these tools is that the rates of language learning, especially United States, are really low. And obviously, I'm not against the use of AI tools in limited doses when it comes to language learning. I understand it's something that's really hard, and sometimes these tools make it a little more approachable. For instance, they're pretty good at generating tailored explanation of certain complicated grammar concepts. So someone without a language tutor or peers who speak the language could be able to use it in that way. However, when it comes to conversations and talking to people, these AI tools, whether it's these instant translation AirPods or ChatGPT and Gemini, they're trying to also replace the role of conversation partners, because now you can download the apps and talk to them in a language of your choice: Spanish, Japanese, Korean, or whatever the most common languages are. And so this conversation isn't necessarily a Luddite one or an anti-AI conversation. I'm more curious in trying to answer the prescient question: why bother to learn a language in a time when we seemingly don't need to, when a lot of these AI tools translate languages better than we are able to and promise to smooth over the otherwise roughshod path toward fluency? So first, some background. So I went to a delightfully artsy, whimsy elementary school, and we had this Spanish teacher that would come a few days per week, and she would sing song for us. I didn't understand a single word of the songs that she would sing because she wouldn't explain it. But I remember the melody of how these words changed and fit together just really lingered in my mind as a kid. And so in high school, I started taking Spanish, and through endless piles of conjugation worksheets and textbooks, I had to figure out this new system of thoughts and expressions and figure out how I could shape my voice within it and learn to express myself using an entirely new, different way of seeing the world. And, and this process, even though it was painstaking, it became exhilarating once I was able to slowly understand what it is that I was studying. I still remember that euphoric light bulb moment in my head when I was listening to Despacito and I could finally understand what the lyrics were saying. And then the subsequent mortification when I realized what Luis Fonsi was actually singing about, which was not age appropriate for the time when I was listening to it. But then, so I continued studying Spanish going into college, and then came my turning point. It was summer of 2024, and I went on a study abroad trip to Argentina. And I remember when I went into the backseat of my host parents' car for the first time on the way back from the airport. And then I heard their thick Cordobés regional accent that sounded nothing like any of my Spanish teachers' accents. And I freaked out and honestly wanted to sink into the earth and never come out again. I panicked. Like, what do you mean? Did all my 7 years of studying Spanish in academic setting mean nothing? Did I not know Spanish at all? I literally went up to my bedroom and sat down on the bed, called my mom, and I was crying. And I'm like, how am I gonna survive like 9 weeks of this? But guess what happened? I did. Slowly, imperfectly, I pushed myself out of my tongue-tied shell, and I let my host family and my new acquaintances in Argentina witness me struggling to put words in a sentence together, and in that way gave them the opportunity to help me. I befriended my roommates who spoke better Spanish than I did. I joked around with my host dad, Alberto, and together we listened to his favorite tango songs by the famous Argentinian musician Carlos Gardel. I made empanadas with Julia, and I felt happy tears roll down my face when Argentina scored the game-winning goal at the Copa America on our beat-up TV screen. No AI tool in its eerie, cold perfection would have let me open up my heart this way and bond with these people that I previously didn't know. AI could have only given me the low-hanging fruit, comprehension, and not the hard-earned, sun-ripened, worthwhile ones on the top, genuine connection. And speaking Spanish in Argentina forced me out of my spectator role into the ring of my new life there. I had to become a braver person to speak Spanish. I had to take chances and fail spectacularly sometimes to talk to new people. It was a whole different way of approaching my life and pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And I noticed my language skills improving as a result. Now, let's look at what happened the next summer, summer of 2025, when I went to Taiwan to study Mandarin. Here, I was sorted into a language class that felt much higher level than I was prepared to handle. I mean, I could barely describe like my surroundings in a room in Mandarin, and one of my classmates was quoting Confucius directly from the ancient texts. And so naturally, I felt very out of my element. I wish I could say that this was a classic underdog tale where I rose to the challenge and studied from dusk till dawn and through the power of vulnerability and making mistakes caught up to my peers. No, that did not happen. In fact, I sunk into this feeling of deep hopelessness. It felt like no matter what I did or how hard I tried, that I wasn't measuring up to some level that I had set up in my head. And it's here that I made a grave mistake. I retreated within myself instead of even trying to get myself out of my tongue-tied shell. I buried myself in my textbook and I reworked a lot of my homework assignments using translation tools because I felt like what I could offer in Mandarin on its own wasn't good enough. I studied and studied, and I tried to memorize vocab and turns of phrase, all while shunning spontaneous interactions, which would have been better opportunities to improve my speaking skills, but also connect with people. I had this deep sense of shame. I didn't want anyone to see me struggling, unlike in Argentina, when I was a little more open to that. And in this moment, you can see how easy it is to look at AI as a life-saving form of relief in this kind of situation, instead of the vulnerability cop-out that it actually is. But even playing it safe like that had its side effects. For this class, we were required to give weekly oral presentations. And since I was feeling so insecure, I would try to concoct really elegant and fancy sounding scripts that were very inauthentic to the way I typically express myself. And so naturally, I would fumble and bumble on stage and completely bomb everything and feel my face heat up with shame and humiliation, which only made the cycle worse. And these photos show the handful of moments that were breakthroughs for me in the Taiwan program. And those were the moments when I was able to kind of get out of my self-consciousness and not prioritize protecting my ego in the same way. Here, I let my friends in Taiwan see me struggling to string together a sentence or miserably mispronouncing a word. And in those moments were when I felt the most free, not when I was trying to use a translating tool to make my sound better than I actually was. Because the reality is, you can't trick anyone into thinking your language level is better than it is. The thing about language learning, it's very honest. You can't run or hide from your true level. Instead, no matter how difficult it is, you have to force yourself to be willing to make those mistakes in the public eye, essentially, in front of other people, even if you're worried about what they might think of you. Because only in that way you're able to form those meaningful connections through vulnerability. But vulnerability is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. It's much easier to resort to these AI tools, which is why I'm so worried about their increasing availability. But at the same time, it's this vulnerability, it's this willingness to put yourself out there with other people that forms those deeper, meaningful bonds. Because in Argentina, I was willing to risk rejection or ridicule from other people in the hopes of making those genuine connections, I was able to put myself on the path towards Spanish fluency and that risk being rewarded. But in Taiwan, when I was so desperately trying to minimize that risk and more easily discouraged from taking that leap of faith, that's when my Mandarin wasn't able to improve the same way that my Spanish had. And so ultimately, vulnerability is hard, but so is everything that is worth doing. When we think about why we admire Renaissance artists or why we admire the work and the feats of Olympic athletes, we do it not because what they do is easy or convenient, but precisely because it's hard. And when we put ourselves out there in language learning and we ignore the temptation to make things easier with some quick fix like an AI translation tool, we make ourselves worthy and deserving of the joys and responsibilities of connection. And it's something that AI can't shortcut us into. It's something that we earn on our own. Yeah, thank you.